Hello everyone and welcome to Inform New Hampshire. We are broadcasting on Manchester Public Television Channel 23, Mondays, Thursdays, Saturday, Sunday. And we also have a YouTube channel by the same name, Inform New Hampshire. And we recently opened up a Facebook page by the same name, Inform New Hampshire, so feel free to join if you want to be kept informed on we do additional postings of different information, news and information that you generally won't find in the new mainstream media. So Richie and I are concerned about the situation for our country right now. We believe we're in deep peril. There are a lot of forces working against this country to attack us in a number of ways, currency being one of them. And so we are working hard to inform people of the things that are happening. Both Richie and I are state coordinators for National Liberty Alliance. The National Liberty Alliance is a nationwide organization committed to restructuring the common law grand juries across the nation. They have currently constituted all of the 3,133 counties with the grand juries, and we are working our way into the court systems with a lot of resistance, as you can imagine. The common law grand juries are a tool used by we the people to investigate and root out corruption in government and to prevent government authorities from overreach and from criminal activity. A grand jury consists of 25 people. It can be anyone in the community, and they can meet in secret. They do not have the power of subpoena, but they do have the power to investigate anything they choose to investigate. If they believe crimes are being committed, they submit an indictment or a presentment to the sheriff or to the prosecutors, and at that point, the remainder of the system takes action. The prosecutor or the sheriff, arrests can be made, and then trials can be run. And so let's see. Today's show, we were going to have a guest on here today. The guest had some other things happen, so we're going to wing it a little bit. We're going to have a little bit of fun, and we're going to talk about one of our former presidents, which I don't really want to say who it is yet, but I'm going to play a little quiz for you and see if you can guess who this president is. So let's have some fun here and see who this president might be.
See how long it takes you to get this one.
Question number 1. What American president launched a massive invasion of another country that posed no threat and without a declaration of war? What president raised a huge army at his own will without the approval of Congress?
Washington.
What president started a war of choice in violation of every principle of Christian just war teaching? What president said that he had to violate the Constitution in order to save it?
Van Buren.
How many is that you've guessed? 3? So far, you are wrong, Richie, but those are good guesses. I think you might want to reach a little bit further back in time. Now, I brought a list of all the presidents here, just so that I can check off which ones you are guessing.
What president declared the elected legislatures of 13 states to be combinations of
John
criminals that he had to suppress? What president said he was indifferent to slavery but would use any force necessary to collect taxes?
Jefferson.
Now, you know Jefferson was not indifferent to slavery. Jefferson was an abolitionist.
That's right, too.
Pardon me?
That's right, too.
Yeah, he was an
I
abolitionist.
stand corrected.
Jefferson was a good man. All right, let's go.
What president sent combat troops from the battlefield to bombard and occupy New York City?
Johnson.
Wrong again, but good guess. But this is interesting. Sent combat troops to New York City to hold the city. That's something we all should know, but I've never even heard that before, so let's go on.
What president sent the army to arrest in the middle of the night thousands of private citizens for expressing their opinions?
Now that's a big one. Violating the First Amendment, violating due process. What else? Everything.
Just
Incarcerating people. What one of our presidents sent out, what did he say, the army?
the army, yeah?
To arrest Americans in the middle of the night and incarcerate them.
I'd say Nixon.
Nixon might have if we'd given him the chance, but no, it wasn't Nixon. So here we go.
And held them incommunicado in military prisons with total denial of due process of law.
Do you remember that in your history books? An American president arresting citizens, tens of thousands, holding them in jail without due process of law. Do you remember that in the history books? Weird, huh? All right, let's see.
And had his soldiers destroy newspaper plants. What president was the first ruler in the civilized world to make medicine a contraband of war?
Jimmy Carter.
What president signed for his cronies special licenses to purchase valuable cotton from an enemy country, even though he had forbidden such trade and punished other people for the same practice?
Now that's an interesting one because he's allowing his friends to break the law, but not the regular everyone else.
That would be Grant.
You think it's Grant?
Sure.
How much? You want to put some money on that?
No,
All right,
this
all right,
is
all right.
TV. We can't be
that's-
wagering.
What president refused medical care and food to his own soldiers held by the enemy country?
Now we know Barack would do that, but we know it's not Barack because it's farther back in time.
What president presided over the bombardment and house-by-house destruction of cities and towns that were undefended and not military targets?
Andrew Jackson. That one I know. Andrew Jackson.
No, that's not right.
No?
Andrew, however, was the 7th president, and he was the first president of the Democratic Party. Now, you know what's interesting, Richie, is that prior to the 7th president, the previous 4, there were no political parties other than they were Federalists. They called themselves Federalists, having created the Federalist Papers or whatever. But the next 4 presidents, who were Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, and John Quincy Adams, their political party was the Democratic Republican. So Democratic-Republican. And I'm bringing this up because I just want to point this out, because for those who know, it always drives us a little crazy when we hear people say we need to spread democracy or we need to hold on to this democracy. And why I want to bring this up is that we are not in a democracy. We never were. The founders loathed democracies. They are not a good form of government. It is mob rule, and this is definitely not a democracy. This is a republic. The United States is a republic. Now, it is a democratic republic, meaning that it's a republic, the noun, and democratic, an adjective, meaning that we do offer voting. There is voting rights. There is voting in this country, but it's done representatively. So anyway, I just wanted to...
Well, do you know the difference between a democracy and a republic?
Yeah. Tell this one.
Well, a democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb deciding what to have for dinner. Think about that in your mind. Visualize that. A republic is 2 wolves and a well-armed lamb awaiting the outcome.
There you have it.
That's how you know the difference.
Here we go.
What president's forces deliberately targeted women and children and destroyed their housing, food supply, and private belongings?
Harrison.
That's an interesting one. What president targeted women and children? Now, this is interesting because so far, most of you haven't guessed this. Probably the ones that do guess it right have done some research to know this. Here's the reason we're doing this. One of the reasons is that a lot of the research that we do, we find out things that demonstrate that our entire educational system has either lied to us or has committed the sin of omission. Yeah, they're admitting important, relevant facts to our history that would have us know and understand things at an entirely different level and in entirely different ways. And they do it deliberately to dumb us down and to keep us servile and to prevent us. They say if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it, meaning that, well, whatever.
Well, anyway, before you hit that,
Yeah.
I don't know if you said this, but I want to give the people a hint. The president that's on this tape, or rather, the president, it's only one president who committed all these atrocities. I'll give you that much, and hopefully you'll get the rest.
Yep.
It's not a series of presidents, it's one president.
Here we go.
What president's occupying forces engaged in imprisonment, torture, and execution of civilians and seizing them as hostages.
Torture, execution, seizing them as hostages. Now, there was a point in time where we had the Geneva Convention, which outlawed a lot of that stuff. So we know it's probably prior to that, so keep guessing.
Under what president did the Army have the largest number of criminals, mercenaries, and foreigners? Who was the first American president to plot the assassination of an opposing head of state? Who had the least affiliation with Christianity of any American president and blamed God for starting the war over which he presided? What president voted for and praised a law which forbade black people from settling in his state?
Now, that one you should know about. What president proposed a law and was forbidding black people from settling in his state? So it was a president who lived in a state, and he didn't want the black people to come into his state. So that's an interesting one, and that one's vital. You should know it, given all the education and there's so much talk of racism and our history of racism that I'm overwhelmingly surprised that this information has never been talked about. So let's go on.
What president said that all black people should be expelled from the United States because they could never be full-fledged citizens?
Now, that one is really controversial. What president wanted to ship people out of this country, black people? And interesting enough, he wanted to ship them to Liberia in Africa. Do you know what president that was? Here we go.
What president was the first to force citizens to accept as legal money pieces of paper unbacked by gold or silver?
Now, Richie, I wanted to ask you, is that against the law?
Yeah, Article 1, Section 8 in the Constitution, yes.
So,
only Congress has the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof, so yes, it is.
So this president that we're talking about took it upon himself to make his own currency and did so without backing it with gold or silver.
And they were called greenbacks, if that helps you any.
Oh, it's going to cue some of you into this, and maybe you're getting fired up because you didn't know this history. It's going to blow your bubble. Here we go.
Who was the first president to institute an income tax? Who was the first president to pile up a national debt too vast to be paid off in a generation? Who is considered almost universally as the greatest American president, indeed as the greatest American of all time, and as a world hero of democracy?
Oh, that's interesting. So all those things that this president did, and yet he's considered one of the greatest presidents ever. Let's go on.
What predecessor is President Obama most often compared to?
I'm going to try to, Dean, if you go along with this, I'm going to try to hold off on giving the answer.
Okay.
But I would like to say a couple things in defense of this particular president. One of the things I wanted to bring up, because I didn't learn this in history, and I didn't learn a lot of that in history. By the way, that was Thomas Woods, who's a great historian in my eyes. Came across with that tape. You can find him on YouTube, Thomas Woods. Who's the other one? Thomas D. Lorenzo. There's quite a few of them that have this information. I wanted to say something about this particular president because when he was 9, his mother died. He had an 11-year-old sister, and I found this kind of really telltale. After his mother died, his father figured, hey, I'm going to take off and look for another wife. So he left his 2 children, his 9 and 11-year-old, in the cabin with some dried berries. And that was it, dried berries. He was gone for 6 months. 6 months. Think about that for a 9 and 11-year-old kid to be at home. The neighbors found him and intervened, and everything worked out okay. I'm not sure when they intervened, if it was a week, a month, I'm not sure how long later. But it must have had a traumatic experience on this particular president, and I just want to bring that up because although I've heard what you heard on this particular president, I don't know, I mean, I wasn't there when all this happened. I wasn't there when all this transpired, and to second guess somebody is really hard to do. But in light of all of this stuff, my attitude towards him is changing from what I learned in school, and that's my big point. what I learned in school isn't any of the information you just heard. And by the way, all that information is true and provable. So I think it's noteworthy to mention that.
A couple more points to make in defense of this person regarding his upbringing. He was, his granddad was murdered by an attack by a group of Indians out on the plains. His dad was said to be a brutal disciplinarian. His mother, now I'm not sure, this must be the next mother that he brought in, but was said to have psychological trouble. And years later, his brother had his mother committed to an asylum. And so there is some definite influences in his youth that would have caused him to have some, well, whatever, might have given him some excuses in modern times for being a thug or whatever. Anyway, so this president, shall we say?
Sure, go ahead. I don't know who it is, so I'm kidding.
The man we're talking about is President Lincoln. Now, most of you have been taught the history and the history books how great President Lincoln was, and that he was the great emancipator of slavery and held the Union together and that sort of thing. But what we're finding out from some research is that most of the history that we've been taught is propaganda. It is slanted in favor of making this man some sort of, I don't know what to say other than they're making him out to be something he's not.
Well, let me jump in with something here, unless I interrupted you.
Please do. Yeah, go ahead.
No, the Emancipation Proclamation. Honest Abe wasn't quite as honest as our history books led us to believe. Instead of freeing the slaves, Mr. Lincoln enslaved all of us. And if you go back between 1860 and 1871, you'll find out what I'm told with the Libra Code, the Reconstruction Act, all of those things where we were supposed to be, or the blacks were supposed to be free. And by the way, this Constitution freed us all. It doesn't say anything about color in here. All of us are free regardless of our skin color or religion or anything else. So the more garbage they heap on top of us, the worse it becomes for us. But he turned the United States of America, the government, into a corporation in 1861, I believe. It could be off a year on the date. I think it's 1861. By doing so, he eliminated the government entirely, created a corporate system. Being an attorney, maybe he understood that. I don't know. Maybe he was even forced into it. But because of his death, it was never changed, his assassination. So we're all slaves today. Social Security, you don't have to pay. The income tax, I'm sorry, I hate to use that word. The tax on your wages or compensation, you don't have to pay. There is no law compelling you to do so. Why do you have to pay real estate tax on your house? Why are you paying the government real estate tax on your house? Why are you paying insurance on your car? All of this money, that every single fee that goes to the government is meant to extract money from your wallet and put it in theirs. You are not free. You're a debt slave. And if you want to trace it back, which is what we did and other people long before us, it can be traced back to Abraham Lincoln, unfortunately. Because in my eyes, the man was a great man. And now I'm digging, well, not now necessarily, but the last few years, I've found out quite differently. He's a tyrant. It's kind of alarming. At least it was for me, and it still is. You know, you like to think this is my hero. I was reading a book. I'm in the middle of reading the book, The Shays' Rebellion. And George Washington made a comment about the militia, which surprised me, and I'm beginning to wonder about him too. But I always considered him a hero. He was not too good as a general, because he only won a couple battles. Most of them he lost. But he made a comment about the militia. And the militia is, back then anyway, was comprised of most of the rich people, the people that had money. The poor people couldn't afford to buy a gun and ammunition. But he felt as though the militia shouldn't appoint their own officers it should be set up similar to Europe and their military. And when he said that after just defeating Europe and, referring to them as tyrants and everything, it didn't make sense to me. So I'm going to be looking into him a little bit more too. But I'm not making any allegations against him, and that particular statement surprised me. So we'll see what happens with it.
Well, we're talking about a time where we don't know a lot of the periphery information, but we do know that Abraham Lincoln presided over the death and destruction of 650,000, roughly estimated, or more, American citizens. So he went to war with his own country. Now the South was seceding from the Union, but they were doing so because they were being overtaxed without representation, because the North was extracting money from them and using it for other things, not to benefit the South. The Union always was and was considered to be at the time, even nearly all of the newspapers would reveal that they considered it to be a voluntary participation in the Union. So the 13 colonies were part of the federal Union voluntarily. So to threaten them in the in Lincoln's inaugural address, he literally threatened. I can't remember the exact quote, but he threatened the South in a vague threat. But he also, in his inaugural address, if you want to look up Thomas DiLorenzo on YouTube, you'll see, the real Abraham Lincoln. He wrote a book. He also wrote Lincoln Unmasked, another book. And Thomas is quoted saying he calls Lincoln's inaugural address the slavery forever speech, because Lincoln was pro-slavery, and he was throughout most of his administration until it became politically expedient for him to abolish slavery. But even afterwards, like it said in the little preamble here on my phone, he was attempting to thwart black people from coming into his state, and he was attempting to create legislation to ship the freed black slaves back to Africa, or to Africa, not back to Africa, but to Africa. So that's Lincoln. That's your man. Sad but true. Now, the big question is, well, why were we all sold this bill of goods about who this man was and what kind of president he was? And the answer to that is, I just don't really know, other than most of our history that we've been taught is fake. Interesting that I'm saying that, because I saw an article today about a German, I didn't tell you this, but a German journalist, and he's a prominent German journalist, who just came out and said that he was trained, he's been doing it for 25 years, and they were trained to deceive the public. He said that a lot of his news was managed and generated by the CIA to be pro-American and against Russia. But it was a very interesting find. I think you can look it up if you just Google that. So a couple more things about Lincoln was that he supported a constitutional amendment to preventing government from ever intervening with slavery, which is just another nail in the coffin there. So we have a huge misconception about one of our former presidents, and say what you will about him. He was probably very smart, very talented, but I would say that he's, completely violated and trampled on the Constitution. He completely operated outside of law, outside the color of law, and it's time to wake up and take a look. If you're interested in doing research, like Richie said, you can look up Thomas Woods on YouTube or Thomas DiLorenzo on YouTube. All right, so we have roughly about 5 minutes left, Richie. I wanted to mention, and I know you know the website, and I'll forget it, but one of our friends, Jerry DeLamus, was arrested on trumped-up charges by the feds. Jerry took the time. Jerry's just a great American. He's a great neighbor. He's a great citizen. He's a great husband. He's just an all-round model
Good
citizen.
man.
Yeah, he's a good man. He's
decent
honest. He's helpful with people. He's motivated. He's a former Marine, and he's a provider for his wife. And I'm not sure if they have children, to be honest with you, but he took the time to go out west 2 years ago during the Bundy Ranch standoff. He did not participate, I don't believe, in the actual moment of the standoff, and so there are a number of things that the charges indicate that he did that he wasn't even a part of. So the federal government, aka the FBI, has made up charges against him, and they came in and they took him out of his house with a bunch of vehicles and military garb and SWAT team-like environment. They took him and they incarcerated him, and they're charging him on, I think, 9 different charges that are just not something that he did. So he's currently incarcerated. So we are encouraging people, you, the listener, to if you so choose, to maybe contribute to a fund that has been set up to assist Susan in continuing on with her life. She's taking care of her mother, who has Alzheimer's, and she's also a state representative for the state of New Hampshire. And she has a lot of responsibilities, but she's alone now, trying to cope with having her husband swept away as a political prisoner by our United States government. And Richie, you want to tell them the website for that?
Yes, the website for contributing to Jerry's legal fund is www.patriotjerry.com. And I'm sure him and his wife would both appreciate some assistance. What it appears like to me is that the United States government, and I don't mean everybody in the government, there's good and bad and everything, but unfortunately there are people in the upper levels of our government who are evil. And they're trying to take good people out of the way. And Jerry's one of them. Robert Lavoy Finicum is another one. They killed that poor man. He was a decent man, just trying to make his way, and he was standing up for his rights, and they killed him. As a matter of fact, what you should do is write a letter to the Department of Justice demanding an investigation on that one. If you watch the video, and it can be seen on YouTube, Robert Lavoy Finicum executed. It was just that. It was an execution, an assassination, a murder, whatever you want to call it. And they cleared it and says it was justifiable shooting. Well, it wasn't a justifiable shooting. But in terms of Jerry DeLemus, please help him, because he needs the help. He has done nothing wrong, and he's fighting this battle all by himself. He shouldn't be. So we're trying to lend moral support for him.
Just as a reminder, again, Richie and I are state coordinators for the National Liberty Alliance, and the National Liberty Alliance has a solution to America's problems, or the problems that we bring up on our show here. That solution is the common law grand jury. Feel free to do some research on that. We hold meetings here in Manchester every Wednesday evening at 6:30, and be happy to have any of you join us. Richie and I are committed to the restoration of our great republic, and we have an uphill battle to fight. We need everyone to wake up and join us, and stand up for what you believe in. Stand up for the traditions of our country and the founding principles on which this country was formulated. So,
jump in, Dean. I just wanted to say that a couple times on this program I've said I'm not here to recruit members for NLA, and I am here to recruit members for NLA. But our main purpose, NLA's main purpose, is to save this country from the direction it's heading in. And NLA does have a solution to America's problem, a positive, peaceful, and lawful solution. So we're asking people to get behind us, understand what we're trying to do, and support our efforts. This isn't about Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal. It's about America, period. And I'm here to try to save it, as is Dean.
okay. Thank you for tuning in. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.